All right, let's go to the Detroit Lions. They kicked it off by trading down from pick number 6, trade down to number 12. They take running back Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama, and then their 18th, pick 18, their second first rounder, Jack Campbell, the linebacker out of Iowa. They go back to Iowa in round 2 with tight end Sam Laporta, safety Brian Branch in round 2 as well with pick 45, and then they go Hendon Hooker, the QB out of Tennessee. Surprised the people with Broderick Martin, the monster defensive tackle out of Western Kentucky. And some people like Colby Swordstall as a developmental tackle in round 5. So interesting late round picks there for the Lions. But, of course, the whole story is going to be they had 5 picks out of the top 68.
Yeah.
Every time we did mock drafts, we said, man, this could be an amazing haul for the Lions. I think they got very good football players. Of course, the question is going to be the positional value aspect of it. Running back, linebacker to start. What are your thoughts on the Lions draft here?
So the Lions draft requires some nuance. You know?
I agree.
If you don't like nuance, if you just want good or bad, you probably want to stop listening for a few minutes because you need to sort of parse this out in pieces. I think, generally speaking, certainly at the top of the draft, the Lions reached, so that's bad. For good players, that's good. At positions of low value, that's bad. Now, where that balances out is the question and the thing that will determine how good this draft is. I think when you look at it in entirety, this is going to end up looking like a very good draft. The question is, did they maximize what it could have been if they had targeted maybe more valuable positions? I also think that in this year of all years, there is more excuse for reaching, quote unquote. You know, usually we've been talking about that's a very bad thing to do. If you reach relative to the consensus board, the chances of you screwing up that pick are massive. But part of it, I think, is the league is catching up a little bit to position value as much as some people fight against it. So I think generally consensus boards are going to skew towards more valuable positions. So, for example, Bijan Robinson, right? You can see Bijan's ranking in consensus boards, or just when you get other consensus boards that narrow the thing a little bit. Like you can see PFF essentially dragging down Bijan's ranking because we factor in he's a running back. You can't put a running back as the second most valuable or the second best player on a big board. You have to drag him down the rankings a little bit. And similarly, you can see other big boards that don't factor in quarterback value. So they'll get the third best quarterback will rank in the 40s or whatever, whereas PFF's the third best quarterback is probably going to be a top 10 player regardless. So what I'm saying is I think if you do target players that are of these lower value positions, running back, off the ball linebacker, tight end, safety, you're probably going to get it's closer than it looks in terms of a reach relative to the big board, because I think the big board is probably undervaluing those guys slightly because of the position value. So I think you can excuse that a little bit more than normal. And in this draft more than ever, I think there's value in going with the safety of just taking good players.
Well said, Sam. I think that's all fair.
Thank you.
Look, I'm torn, right? We joke about the model and this and that and the numbers I have or whatever, and every team has their own, not just numbers, they have their own convictions, right? They have their own scouting grades on this. And I listened to Brad Holmes and his press conferences after night 1, and he mentioned, you see a lot of like the quotes that go around that he had or whatever. I thought he was very honest about the fact that they loved a handful of players in this draft. Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell, obviously 2 of them. He also admitted a couple of the players that they loved were off the board. And he was doing that loved these players. Mm-hmm. He was emphasizing the love factor. I'm guessing one of those players was Devin Witherspoon, who went at number 5, the pick before the Lions would have selected at 6. And that's what's interesting about this whole thing, right? We now have this narrative that Brad Holmes, GM of the Lions, doesn't believe in positional value, and he drafted a running back in the first round, and in fact, in the top 12. When I do believe if Devin Witherspoon's on the board, they probably just take him at 6. The cornerback out of Illinois. They probably take Witherspoon at 6, and then maybe they circle back and get Campbell at 18, or maybe Gibbs ends up being the pick at 18, despite the fact that Brad Holmes claims that he got very many text messages saying, oh, he never would have been there at 18. Right. Good pick.
Do people actually do that, by the way? Because everybody says that, right? Oh, as soon as we pick that guy, everyone said, damn it, you sniped me. The way they do in mock drafts.
I bet there's 1 or 2 when we do that.
Yeah. But we like, we're not busy. You know what I mean? When we're doing those kinds of drafts, you're not really doing anything. So you're like, damn it, you stole my player.
I think
do NFL GMs in the middle of the draft like go, quick, you sniped me, you grabbed my player, I was going to take him 2 spots later.
It's probably always Les Snead because he never has any picks, so he's just texting everybody. But like, I think it does happen because in round 1, I think it can happen. GMs aren't actually that busy. Like if you're picking at pick 28, you're not doing a whole lot at pick 12, right? You're not worried about a whole bunch until it gets closer. So you could go, do whatever you want.
So my bottom line for this draft is that I think I'm coming around to the idea that the only pick of those first sort of 4 or 5 that I don't like is Jahmyr Gibbs at 12. And this is coming from the poster, the guy that's been railing against, hey, we've gone too far with the running back correction. I think you could justify Bijan Robinson. Maybe I wouldn't have done it at 8, but 10, sure. Anywhere in the teens, 12, fine. I don't think you can make the same case for Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan Robinson is the best running back prospect we've seen come into the league in 10, 15 years. Gibbs is not. And Gibbs is great. I love Gibbs. He's a great running back. He's an explosive player. He's a dynamic weapon. He can be a part of your pass game. There's a lot to love about Jahmyr Gibbs. But in this world of, are you looking at a genuine unicorn or are you looking to find an exception? I feel like Gibbs is looking to find an exception.
Yeah.
Like, is Gibbs really dramatically better than a lot of other running backs that have elite speed and receiving ability and explosiveness that have come into the league in the last 10 years, And my answer to that is probably not. And even in this year where you're low on blue chip players, it's, a weird draft and all that kind of thing. I think 12 for that is just too much.
Okay, so let's there's nuance to all this again. Let me just say off the bat, I do believe in the general axioms not to draft a running back that high. Mm-hmm. If I was in draft meetings, I would discuss how much I love these players, but I would say as an organization, that's not for us. I would rather spend on a different position, no matter how much we love the player. What was interesting about hearing Brad Holmes talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell again was the love for those players. And in a draft where I think we all admitted there were probably some teams who only wanted to draft maybe 8 or 10 players in the first round. And the Lions were saddled with 2 picks. And some of their players were already off the board. They did trade down, grab an extra pick or 2, right? That was, as a starting point, that was excellent, I thought. And then I think they just said, there's only a handful of players that we really, really love. Mm-hmm. And I know that Brad Holmes described both players not as their position. Jahmyr Gibbs isn't a running back.
Yeah.
Jack Campbell isn't a linebacker, which is kind of like, again, you're in these draft meetings, and I see Dan Campbell and all the scouts and the coaches are like, Jahmyr Gibbs is just a football player. He fits the culture. Like, this is what's happening in the meeting, right? He fits what we want. He's a culture fit. He's an explosive player. He can score from anywhere on the field. He's a playmaker, right? And all of that's true. All of that's true, and it's fine. But at the end of the day, he still is a running back.
Yeah.
And there's still a pay scale for running backs. And, he's still going to be making, mid-tier running back money right off the bat. Like, that stuff still matters from a team-building standpoint.
And particularly on the offensive side of the ball, I think it speaks to this idea of looking for an exception, like seeing something that isn't really there. I think you hear a lot of times when teams zero in on an unusual skill set player on offense, when they want to talk them up, they start talking about, well, this guy's not, insert pigeonhole position here. He's a weapon. Like, he's just he's an X factor. It's like, but the league generally is not good at maximizing the use of those guys. If you have a guy, like, remember when Denard Robinson was just an offensive weapon. Like, well, okay, and how did that work out, right? He just wasn't good enough at anything to be used in the NFL. So I'm not saying that Jahmyr Gibbs is Denard Robinson in terms of not being good, but my point is, when you start articulating this guy is not a running back, he's not a receiver, he's a weapon, he's something, he's an offensive playmaker. What that is actually describing is we don't quite know what to do with this guy because he doesn't fit naturally into a normal spot. And when that is your starting point, I question whether you're best able to use what he's good at. Like, Christian McCaffrey has been talked about for years as this unique weapon, offensive playmaker. And he has, nobody's been particularly good at unlocking this, unrivaled, unique superstar potential of Christian McCaffrey. Like, you can use him more as a receiver, but The league is not good at that.
But here's where I disagree, I think, slightly here. When you say Jahmyr Gibbs is a weapon, I don't think it means you don't know what you're going to do with him. I think it means you're going to go out of your way to get him the ball. And again, this is where I think it ends up becoming, it actually becomes riskier. When you say, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, he's an offensive weapon, we're going to line him up in the slot. We're going to line him up wide. This guy needs to have 10 touches in the pass game per game, plus 10 carries. That is when I think it becomes scary. When it is good, and where I'll disagree a little bit, is I think the Niners used Christian McCaffrey perfectly fine. They didn't say, hey, we just traded a haul for Christian McCaffrey. He's got to get his touches.
Yeah.
There were some games where he got touches. There were some games where he lines up out wide, he has a mismatch against the linebacker, and he wins. There are some games where he carries the ball more than others, creates some big plays. But if the Niners went and said, McCaffrey's got to get his touches, that would be to the detriment of players who had more valuable touches, who is Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. If the Lions take touches away from Amon-Ra St. Brown, potentially Jamison Williams down the field, and even their tight ends, if they take touches away from them to force feed Jahmyr Gibbs, then I think that's a problem. But when they use Gibbs and it's like, this week, against these linebackers, he might have 8 or 10 catches, and that's going to win us a game. That's where you use the offensive weapon, and I think it's okay. So I think there's a fine line between feeding a guy and just using him as your third or fourth option in playing matchups within a week where Gibbs can be really valuable.
Yeah, like the 49ers unlocked, quote-unquote, Christian McCaffrey better than anybody else has managed, and I think they did it simply by asking him to just be the running back in what is already an absolutely smoking hot offense. Like, they didn't do anything particularly special with him. They didn't do anything wildly creative. They just said, you're going to be our running back and you have more skills than the guys that were in that position beforehand.
But
therefore,
he played some wide receiver. He split out wide, right, and they used some formation variation and all that stuff. They used it.
But no more than like any other offense. Like, they haven't invented this. Like, so they have done a really good job of genuinely creating an offensive weapon trademark position for Deebo Samuel. They didn't do that for McCaffrey. They just made him the running back. And in that system, the running back is capable of making far more big plays because everybody else is already terrorizing defenses. So my point being, when you start talking like that, of this guy is not a running back, he's an offensive weapon, he's just a playmaker, I worry about what your plan for him actually is, and if you're wildly overestimating your capability to create something that doesn't really exist. And now look, all that being said, Ben Johnson, I think, was the coach of the year last year in terms of being able to do that kind of thing. So if you're going to lean on anybody crafting a position that doesn't exist, I'm going to say Ben Johnson is the guy to be able to get the most out of that. But I do think that when you start talking like that, you have effectively labeled a guy as something that he isn't, which is unique. And Jahmyr Gibbs is an explosive, fast running back that can catch. That's great. But they tend to come into the NFL most years. You know, I don't know that you've identified this unicorn that we haven't seen the likes of before, and which is the only way you can justify spending the 12th overall pick on him, essentially.
So, look, yeah, I think it's I don't know what the alternative is for the Lions.
At 12?
Yeah, I mean, I know you could take other players. I'm just saying here, I'm trying to get into their mentality. It feels like they only had like 6 or 7 players that they loved in the first. So you could always keep trading down. You could say, oh, they should have drafted Christian Gonzalez. But if they truly don't want him, fine. I guess before you get to that point where you just only love so many players, I think you need to factor in the positional value stuff and all that, whatever, you know?
Not just Gonzalez, right? But at that point in the draft, you would have had cornerback number 2, whoever you thought that was, wide receiver number 1, tight end number 1, how many edges had gone? 1, 2, edge number 3. So that's probably not, you can make the case there, but like you had a lot of options. So, you know, I think there were other ways to go. Kalijah Kancey, by the way, who I think is a top 10 player, is available at either of the 2 spots that the Lions drafted their guys at. So look, that's the one position where I have a bit of a problem with it. I don't think that Jahmyr Gibbs can justify 12 overall. But
right, I'm going to give one more statement here.
Well, okay, you want to do that before and then go to the other spots?
It's going to include the other players.
Okay, so the other positions, though, I think there's a much more sound, cogent argument. Jack Campbell at 18. All right, it's a reach, fringe first rounder we were talking about. Having said that, in a draft where every linebacker looks like a weird safety hybrid, Jack Campbell has prototypical 6'5", 250-pound size and the athleticism to go with it. He is a rare linebacker in this draft, I don't really have a problem with taking him at 18. Sam Laporta at 34, you took him over a guy like Darnell Washington. I don't really have a problem with that. Laporta has incredible run after the catch ability. I think he's more suited to today's NFL. And then Brian Branch at 45, that's one of the best picks in the entire draft. I think that guy is a top 10 talent, and the league let him slide because they don't seem to know what to do with him, or his athleticism was a little bit less than they require. Either one of those two things are both put together. Either way, getting him at 45 is an absolute freaking steal. And then last one, Hendon Hooker in the third round. That's a great pick. Like, that's where Hendon Hooker's supposed to go. As much as I've been railing against like his projection to the NFL, it's because everyone was talking about him in the first round, which was batshit crazy given that offense. But in the third, pick 68, that's an incredible, a perfect gamble that if it pays off is one of the best picks in the draft.
Yeah, I love the value in the second round, the third round. Agree with a bunch of that, Sam. I think the Lions are creating a really fun offense. They were a fun offense last year, and they barely tapped into Jamison Williams' deep speed. Laporta is a very shifty tight end. He's difficult to cover, and the Lions did a great job of putting tight ends in space last year as well. And then Gibbs, the space that the Lions create for their playmakers, and they've got some really good explosive playmakers now. So all of this said, here's why I'm torn. First four play. I don't know if we feel the positional value thing. I don't know if we're going to feel it on the field. Brad Holmes was like, you're gonna see these guys contribute right away. I agree with him. Like I think we're gonna see the Lions be good next year, and I think these guys are going to contribute. So I don't know if we're not necessarily going to feel the opportunity cost of maybe not taking higher positions or whatever it may have been. But where I'm really torn is their first four players, all model guys that I believe in, all guys that I think do project well at the next level, and then Hendon Hooker, again, fantastic value at pick 68 in the draft, in round 3, where he probably should have gone round 2 or round 3, and there is no bad quarterback pick. I don't think Kellen Mond, who barely even made the roster after year 2, didn't make the roster after year 2. I don't think that's a bad quarterback pick. You get quarterbacks in the building and you see, and it's not throwing away a third round pick. It's fine. So overall, I do like the Lions draft, even with all the questions at the top, because I do like the players, and I think they're all going to contribute. Brian Branch and Jack Campbell, as far as productive football players on that defense, in a draft where there's a ton of question marks, I think it's going to end up paying off for the Lions. So that's why I'm torn.
I think they got good players. I think the only question is, again, it's opportunity cost. That's the thing I've been hammering home with running backs. It's what did you leave on the table to take a guy at that spot that is a more valuable position. And with the Gibbs one in particular, I think they left too much on the table. That's the move I think they goofed on. Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, no real problem with those picks. I think they added good football players at positions that they can use. And then Hendon Hooker, I think, is a phenomenal gamble to take. I think that's a brilliant pick for them. So overall, I think this was a good draft. The Jahmyr Gibbs pick is the one that I question.
It's a B+ over at PFF.com. B+ for the Lions. A nuanced take on the Lions here.
Nobody likes nuance.
Green Bay Packers. They up next?
Did they get anybody interesting as an undrafted free agent?
I don't know.
No, you don't. They got Starling Thomas. There you go.
Oh, I like Starling Thomas. The 5th.
Yep, the 5th.
Out of UAB, athletic corner. Get him in the mix.
Anytime a guy has been iterating for 4 or 5 generations, you've got to take that guy.
It's going to be the best one.
Right.
It's going to be the best one.